The moment I walked into that conference room, my son's wife looked up from her stack of papers and smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind I spent 31 years learning to read. My son, Joel, sat beside her. He didn't smile. He looked at me the way you look at something fragile that you're not sure will survive the trip. Careful, a little guilty, a little relieved you'd arrange for the padding in advance. The estate attorney, a man named Mr. Calloway, was already seated at the head of the table. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him and a pen in his hand. He glanced up when I walked in. Then he looked again. The pen stopped moving. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said slowly. "Patricia Hargrove." My daughter-in-law, Renee, frowned. "You two know each other?" Mr. Calloway didn't answer right away. He was still looking at me. "I know of her," he finally said. His voice had gone very quiet. "Everyone in the Northeastern District does." That was the moment I knew it was over for her. She just didn't know it yet. Let me back up, because the story doesn't start in that conference room. It starts the way most stories like this do. Slowly, so slowly, that by the time you realize what's happening, you're already halfway swallowed. My husband, Gerald, passed away 3 years ago February. 38 years we were married, and I will tell you plainly that I have not stopped missing him on any single day since. He was a steady man. Quiet. The kind of person who would fix the dripping faucet at midnight because he knew you couldn't sleep with the sound. When he died. Cardiac arrest, no warning. Gone between one breath and the next. I felt like someone had pulled the load-bearing wall out of a house. Everything still standing, but nothing quite level anymore. Joel is our only child. He was 42 when his father died, already married to Renee for 4 years by then. I had tried in that time to like her. She was pretty and well-dressed and said the right things at the right moments. She called me Patricia instead of Mom, which I told myself was just her generation's way. She sent flowers when Gerald died. White lilies. I thanked her for them. What I noticed and filed away quietly, the way I'd trained myself to do, was that Joel changed after we lost his father. He became more anxious, sought approval the way a plant angles toward light, except the light in his case came from Renee. That first Thanksgiving after the funeral, I watched him check her expression before he answered my question about whether he wanted white or dark meat. Such a small thing, but small things tell you everything, if you know how to look. I know how to look. I spent 3 decades as a forensic financial investigator for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I retired at 63 with a commendation and a very boring party in a government conference room with a sheet cake from Costco. My specialty was following money, specifically finding where it went when someone very clever had tried very hard to make it disappear. Nobody in my neighborhood knew this. I'd made a quiet life for myself. Church on Sundays, the garden on weekdays, Tuesday lunches with my friend Opal, and the occasional consultation I did voluntarily for a nonprofit that helped elderly fraud victims. I drove a sensible car. I baked coffee cake for the neighbors when they had babies. I was, to all appearances, exactly what Renee believed I was, a nice old woman who might need managing. She began managing me about 8 months after Gerald died. It started with questions. Was I sleeping enough? Was I eating properly? Had I been taking my blood pressure medication? I told her yes, I was fine, thank you, and left it at that. But then the questions started coming through Joel. He'd call, and I was glad he called. I want to be clear about that, because in those early months I was genuinely lonely, and somewhere in the middle of the conversation he'd mentioned that Renee was worried I seemed confused last time they visited. "Were you feeling okay, Mom? You seemed a little off?" I hadn't seemed off. I had been perfectly fine. But when someone tells you enough times that you don't seem right, you start to wonder. Even I started to wonder. And I had spent my career learning to trust my own observations. The thing that clarified it for me was the filing cabinet. Gerald and I kept a filing cabinet in the back bedroom. Insurance documents, property deeds, his pension paperwork, my retirement accounts, standard household records. In the spring, about 10 months after Gerald passed, I went to pull out a document from my tax preparer and noticed the folders had been rearranged. Nothing dramatic, just reorganized. The property deed had been moved from its usual spot. A folder I didn't recognize sat near the front. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the drawer and very deliberately did not react. 2 days later, I set up a small security camera in that back bedroom. It cost me $39 on Amazon. I pointed it at the filing cabinet and connected it to my phone. The following Saturday, Joel and Renee came for dinner. I cooked pot roast, the one Joel had loved since he was small. After dinner, Joel helped me with the dishes. He's always been good that way. Even now, even when things were at their worst, he would still come help me with the dishes. And Renee excused herself to use the restroom. She was gone for 11 minutes. I didn't say anything. I helped Joel dry the plates and we talked about the baseball season and whether the kitchen needed new caulking around the sink. After they left, I checked the camera. She'd gone straight to the filing cabinet. She was photographing documents with her phone. I sat with that for a long time. I made a cup of decaf and sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the backyard Gerald and I had planted together over 20 years. The hydrangeas that came back every summer whether we deserved them or not, and I thought carefully about what I was going to do. I was not going to confront her, not yet. People who know they're being watched stop giving you information. People who think they're invisible keep moving. I picked up my phone and called my old colleague Roy, who had retired 2 years before me and now consulted privately. I need a favor, I told him, professional courtesy. He said, "What kind?" I said, "The kind where we pretend this is a Tuesday afternoon in 1998 and we're still on the clock." He was quiet for a moment. Then, what did they do? What Renee had done, what I spent the next 4 months documenting with Roy's help and with the assistance of a private attorney named Ms. Okoro who specialized in elder financial abuse, was this. She had been building a case. Not a legal case, a narrative. A carefully constructed story about a grieving widow who was struggling to manage her finances, who was forgetting appointments, who had mentioned to her son more than once that she wasn't sure she understood her accounts anymore. None of this was true, but narratives don't need to be true to be believed, especially when the person narrating them is articulate and concerned-sounding and the subject of the narrative is 67 years old and recently widowed. Renee worked in wealth management. She was good at her job, from what I could tell. She had legitimate clients, legitimate credentials. But somewhere along the line, she had decided that the cleanest path to a comfortable future ran directly through Gerald's estate and my retirement accounts. The plan, as best as Roy and I reconstructed it, was a conservatorship. She was building documentation to petition for legal authority over my finances, arguing I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. She'd already spoken to a geriatric care specialist apparently, and had him lined up to provide an evaluation. She'd been gathering financial statements from the filing cabinet to demonstrate what? Some pattern of mismanagement she'd fabricate or exaggerate. She'd been talking to Joel for months, planting seeds, and Joel, my son, my kind, anxious, grieving son who trusted his wife and wanted everything to be okay, had been watering them without realizing it. She hadn't told Joel the full plan. I'm certain of that now, and it matters to me. The morning I found out about the geriatric specialist, I called my granddaughter, who is 24 and sharp as a tack and lives 40 minutes away. I told Lily, no wait, I need to use her real name. Fiona. My granddaughter Fiona is Joel's daughter from his first marriage. She and Renee had a polite but chilly relationship, which meant Fiona had been watching Renee with the same kind of careful attention I had from a different angle. I knew something was wrong, Fiona told me when I explained what I'd found. Her voice on the phone was very steady, the way young people's voices get when they're furious and choosing not to show it. She asked me once about whether Grandpa's estate was fully settled. I thought it was just making conversation. It wasn't making conversation, I said. What are we going to do? I told her to sit tight, to behave completely normally around Renee, to not even hint. And you? She asked. I'm going to let them have the meeting, I said. Renee had been angling for a family financial review, her words, for about 2 months. Framed as helpfulness, wouldn't it be better, she'd told Joel, if they all sat down with the estate attorney and just made sure everything was in order, for my peace of mind, so I wouldn't have to worry. Joel had brought it up to me gently, apologetically, over the phone. You don't have to, Mom, but she just thinks. I think it's a good idea, I told him. Set it up. He sounded relieved. I imagine Renee, when he told her, also looked relieved. I imagine she felt like things were going according to plan. The estate attorney she'd chosen was Mr. Calloway. She hadn't known when she selected him that he had testified before a Senate subcommittee on elder financial abuse in 2019. She hadn't known that I had submitted a written statement to that same subcommittee and that Mr. Calloway had cited my work specifically in his testimony. She hadn't known any of that. But he knew me. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. Not expensively. I didn't want expensive. I wore my good gray slacks and a blue blouse Gerald had always liked, and I carried the leather portfolio I'd used my entire career, which was battered enough to look unremarkable and which contained, that morning, a very particular set of documents. Fiona met me in the parking garage. She hugged me hard without saying anything, and we walked in together. Renee was already there when we arrived. She was wearing a blazer. She had a neat stack of folders in front of her. I recognized some of them from my own filing cabinet, though she didn't know I recognized them. Joel sat beside her. He stood up when I came in and hugged me and said, "Hi, Mom," in that careful, guilty voice, and I squeezed his arm and said, "It's good to see you, honey," because it was. And then Mr. Calloway looked up. I watched it happen. The slight pause, the second look, the careful stillness that moved over his face as he put it together. He said my name slowly, like he was reading it from a document he hadn't expected to find. Renee frowned. You two know each other. I know of her, Mr. Calloway said. He stopped himself, looked at me with what I can only describe as professional respect. Why don't we begin? Renee set out her folders. She had clearly prepared remarks. She began to lay out her concern for my well-being, for the complexity of managing an estate of this size, for the wisdom of having a structured arrangement going forward. She used phrases like, at her age, and peace of mind, and just to make sure we're protected. She was smooth. She was convincing. If I had been who she thought I was, I might have felt frightened. I waited until she finished. Then I opened my portfolio. The first document I placed on the table was a letter from Ms. Okoro, my attorney, dated 2 weeks prior, formally notifying Mr. Calloway, as executor, that I had retained counsel in anticipation of a potential conservatorship petition and wished the record to reflect my full legal competency. Renee's expression shifted, but only slightly. She hadn't expected that, but she was good on her feet. The second document was a report Roy and I had prepared, a detailed accounting of every photograph Renee had taken in my back bedroom, every document she'd accessed, cross-referenced against dates she'd claimed to be elsewhere. Dates Joel could verify, dates that did not match. Joel's face had gone pale. The third document was a summary prepared by a retired colleague of mine from the Chicago field office, forensic financial analysis of 3 separate accounts that Renee managed for elderly clients, accounts that showed patterns of small, irregular withdrawals over time. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed fraud to an untrained eye. But I had a trained eye, and I had given it to someone else with a trained eye, and between the two of us, we had built something that would not fall apart. I did not say anything dramatic. I did not raise my voice. I set the documents on the table, one at a time, and let them do the talking, the way evidence is supposed to. Mr. Calloway read in silence. His face was entirely professional. When he finished the third document, he looked up at Renee and said, quietly, "I'm going to need to postpone today's meeting." "This is..." Renee started. "Miss Gust's." "Renee," he said, and his tone had changed into something very precise and very cool. "I would strongly encourage you to contact your own attorney before we continue this conversation." The room was silent. Joel was looking at the documents. He hadn't spoken since I started laying them out. He was reading, the way he used to read as a kid, head down, very still, lips slightly parted. I remembered him at 8 years old reading at the kitchen table, and how I used to watch him from the doorway because I could never get over how much I loved him. "Mom," he said finally. His voice was rough. "How long have you known?" "About 4 months," I said. He put his face in his hands. "I won't tell you the legal details, partly because they're still ongoing and partly because they belong to lawyers and not to stories. What I will tell you is that 3 of Renee's clients have now retained attorneys of their own, that the investigation that Roy and I handed off did not stay small, that Renee, whatever she expected to happen when she walked into that conference room, did not expect any of this." Fiona walked me to my car afterward. She held my hand the whole way through the parking garage, which she hasn't done since she was small, and I let her. "Joel called that evening," he cried. "He said he was sorry so many times that I had to tell him to stop, that I couldn't bear it, that his being sorry wasn't the point. The point was what came next. I didn't know," he said. "Mom, I swear I didn't know how far she'd taken it." "I know you didn't," I said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. How did you stay so calm through all of it?" "When I was telling you she was worried about you, when I was listening to her, Mom, I was starting to believe her. I thought about Gerald and the hydrangeas and the filing cabinet and 31 years of following money through its hiding places and what it teaches you, that work, about patience, about not reacting, about letting people move freely in the dark until the lights come on." "She forgot something important," I said. "What's that?" "She thought she was dealing with a woman who didn't know what she had. But I always knew what I had. I just didn't need anyone else to know that I knew." Joel came to Sunday dinner the next week. Just him. He sat at the kitchen table, and we ate the pot roast that had been his favorite since he was small, and he helped me with the dishes after, and we talked about his father, which we hadn't really done together in a long time, about how much Gerald would have hated all of this, the drama and the lawyers, and how he also would have found it in the private way he had, with that dry smile, pretty satisfying. It's a strange thing to be underestimated. I spent a career making use of it. I drove the sensible car and baked the coffee cake and let people look past me, and every time they did, I saw more clearly than they imagined. Renee saw a lonely widow who didn't know what she was doing. She didn't know what she was doing.